talk about you mentioned cognitive load a few times.
Yeah.
What is the kind of break point here? If I was to guess, I would say it's the skills, the things that you need to be very top end esports pro would be fine motor control, concentration, and reaction time. Now those things, I can't think of I can't think of a sport, a real sport that requires those three things in that kind of way, right?
Cricket,
What
Maybe.
what about what about
cricket,
Formula One? Formula One,
the one.
chess.
Okay, great, great, great. So Formula One, yeah, you're probably right. It probably is a great analogy. So, what does the science say about those kind of that as a breaking point? You also mentioned the word burnout a little bit. Like, could you talk a little bit about why esports is idiosyncratic or not, if it's similar to Formula One, and what are the kind of issues that the players face?
Ryan, do you want to take this on?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think. Well, to be totally honest, it's still too early to tell with regards to cognitive load and mental fatigue. The research is still very novel in that area, specifically with an esports population. But specifically regarding things like burnout. So when you look at burnout, it's usually when someone becomes burnt out, it's when they are unable to withstand or deal with or cope with a prolonged stressor over a long period of time. So you've got physiological, psychological, and emotional categories for that. And when you place an individual into an environment, as I mentioned earlier, where they don't have the coping mechanisms to be able to deal with these stressors, specifically over a longer period of time, that leads to burnout and sometimes can be chronic burnout. I think with regards, sorry, go ahead, Jimmy.
Just to jump in there, I mean, there's a big difference between progressive adaptation than there is to burnout. And this is the thing we talk about is, yeah, you want to push your players hard, but when you do that too much, that's when it leads to burnout. And it's not like a short term, right, he's burnt out now. Now it's a progressive thing that, to be honest with you, you should be able to recognize over like a period of time, because you've got the signs there where they're training too much, they're not recovering properly, and that's what's leading to this too much stress, not enough recovery, and they're just that's what leads to that burnout.
Yeah, that's something that's quite actually interesting. One of the perks of having a partner who is a psychologist is that I get to study for all the psychology exams for a master's as well. So one of the new things I learned was regarding the transactional model of stress. And one of the things I found really interesting was that it's actually our perception of the stress itself that causes the physiological effect. So if we can train athletes to become more mentally resilient and more mentally tough, and to perceive the stressor in a way and such that they believe they have the coping mechanisms to be able to deal with that, it leads to that progressive adaptation. Very much like when a lobster is ready to get rid of its shell, it needs that pressure and stress to be able to take on its new form. And this is the way I kind of see gamers. You're constantly leveling up because you're learning these skills, these tips, these tricks, and you're always getting better. And I am such a strong believer in, if you can control your mind and learn these skills, it's going to give you the edge in game. And that's where I think it's really interesting right now where esports is people start to realize that a lot of these guys at the top level, we're all technically quite gifted. All, if you were to do cognitive tests, we're all pretty similar, right? In terms of their mechanical knowledge, micro knowledge, all of that there in game. The bits where they're really going to get most bang for the buck in terms of competitive edge is the out of game factors. Nailing your 8 hours of sleep, nailing your recovery, nailing when you take, your diet and when you take your caffeine and all these different things. That's going to give you the competitive edge. But I think just kind of tying it back, Spike, to initially what you said there about Formula One. Formula One is one of the most data heavy sports there is. There is real-time analytics, real-time feedback, and the drivers' biovitals and the car's performance, and that influences race strategy. It influences so many different things. The thing that I think is really interesting is currently a lot of people don't understand what's actually happening in their body, right? But our bodies are actually one of the richest data sources out there. And if we were actually just better understand internally the processes of what's actually happening, we'll be able to make a better informed response about how we adapt to that or how we approach a certain thing. So I'm a big believer in it, hence why I wear my whip band and do all these other types of like meditation and mindfulness and physical training, because I understand the value of taking that approach and how it influences my performance as a CEO.
You're a hippie, Ryan. That's what you're saying.
I pretty much am. Yeah, I'm quite alternative that way. But I think that leads to greater performance in every aspect of life.
Great. Really agree with you. I mean, as you guys must be, being sports fans, you must have watched The Last Dance on Netflix. right? I mean, if there's ever an example of a player, sports person, who had just a belief and the technical backup for it to come, how many times did Michael Jordan score, the winning basket straight in with like 1.6 seconds or something to run on the clock? I mean, it's almost like there's no point making a Hollywood movie, because that series, that 10-part series, is just there. Yeah. It's just the power and the brutality of that particular person, and it's just incredible. I mean, and that was 20 years ago, and sports science has moved on. Lord only knows what it'd have been like today with any of the modern techniques. I mean, I don't think you can get better, but that team and their winning mentality and all of those margins that those guys played off, and the psychological stuff was just absolutely astonishing. And